She vanished on New Year's Day, no body, no goodbye, no trace. It was the first morning of 2023 in Cohasset, Massachusetts. Quiet, cold, and still. A new year full of promises for most families. But for the Walshe household, it began with silence. 39-year-old Anna Walshe, a successful real estate executive and mother of 3, was nowhere to be found. Her husband, Brian Walshe, calmly told police she had taken an early flight to Washington, D.C. for work. No panic, no urgency. Just a husband explaining why his wife wasn't home. But as hours turned to days, something felt wrong. Anna's phone stopped pinging. Her credit cards went unused. Her car never left the driveway. Friends tried calling, nothing. Coworkers said she never arrived in D.C., and when police knocked on the door of her beautiful suburban home, what they found didn't look like a missing person case. It looked like a cover-up, a faint smell of bleach, a trash bag missing from the bin, fresh paint in the basement, and a husband whose story was starting to fall apart. This wasn't a random disappearance. This was the start of something far darker. A woman with everything to live for, a husband with everything to lose, and a trail of lies that would soon reveal one of the most chilling mysteries of the decade. This is the story of Anna Walshe, the mother, the wife, the woman who vanished without a trace, and the man who lived with her disappearance. To the outside world, Anna and Brian Walshe looked like the picture of success. A loving couple with 3 young sons, a beautiful home in Cohasset, and bright futures ahead. Their social media told a story of family dinners, beach photos, and laughter. Neighbors described them as polite, friendly, even charming. The kind of couple you'd never expect to see on the news. But behind that polished image, something was breaking. Brian wasn't the man Anna once knew. In 2018, he had been charged with federal art fraud, accused of selling to fake Andy Warhol paintings for tens of thousands of dollars. By 2023, he was under house arrest, awaiting sentencing. He wore an ankle monitor. Every movement was tracked. The financial pressure was crushing. Anna, meanwhile, was thriving. She worked for a high-end real estate firm in Washington, D.C., managing luxury properties worth millions. Her job kept her traveling constantly. Boston one week, D.C. the next. But the distance between her and Brian wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional. Friends later told investigators that Anna had started to change. Her usual optimism had been replaced by quiet stress. She'd confided in a friend, "I don't think Brian is capable of love anymore." Another recalled her saying, "I'm done with Brian. I'm ready to move on." In private texts, Anna mentioned feeling unsafe, uneasy. She spoke of arguments that felt wrong, of Brian's sudden mood swings, his temper, his unpredictable behavior. Still, she tried to hold the family together for the children. She wanted to believe he could change, but Brian's world was crumbling. The fraud case had destroyed his professional reputation. His inheritance was tangled in legal battles. Anna's rising career seemed to highlight his failures. Friends would later say, Brian felt trapped, dependent on the woman he was losing control of. In December 2022, Anna took a bold step. She planned to sell several of their properties and relocate full-time to Washington, D.C. Her message to a friend was clear. "This is my fresh start." It was supposed to be a new beginning. Instead, it became the end. The final weeks of that year painted an eerie calm before the storm. The family celebrated Christmas together, smiling in photos, gifts under the tree, the kids laughing. Anna even cooked dinner for friends, cheerful, collected, hopeful. But those close to her noticed something different in her eyes. A few days before she vanished, Anna called her mother in Serbia. It was late. Anna sounded anxious. She told her mother she felt something was wrong, that she wanted her to visit soon. Her mother promised she would. That was the last conversation they ever had. By New Year's Eve, Anna had already booked her return flight to D.C., texted coworkers about meetings, and prepared her luggage. She told a friend she was excited for 2023. But what no one knew was that, inside the walls of that beautiful suburban home, a storm was already brewing. Brian, facing a collapsing marriage and a possible prison sentence, was desperate, and desperation can turn dangerous. In just a few hours, the smiling family man the world thought they knew would become the center of one of the most disturbing disappearance cases in recent American history. Because by the morning of January 1st, Anna Walshe would be gone. New Year's Eve, 2022. For most, it's a night of celebration. Fireworks, champagne, fresh beginnings. For Anna Walshe, it would be the last night anyone ever saw her alive. That evening, the Walshes attended a small New Year's gathering at a friend's house. Guests later said Anna looked beautiful. Bright red lipstick, a black dress, her signature calm smile. But beneath that smile, something seemed off. She kept checking her phone, replying to messages, pacing occasionally. One friend described her as distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Around 1 a.m., the family returned home. Neighbors later recalled hearing nothing unusual. No shouting, no noise, just silence. By 4 a.m., according to Brian, Anna left the house, kissed him goodbye, and headed to the airport for an early flight to Washington, D.C., but that's where the story begins to fall apart. Investigators would later confirm no flight was ever booked. No Uber was called. No cab picked her up. Her cell phone pinged near the family home until around 3:14 a.m. And then it went dark. When co-workers in D.C. didn't hear from her later that morning, concerns started to spread. Anna was always punctual, always connected. She never just disappeared. By January 2nd, when she failed to show up again, one of her colleagues reached out to Brian. He calmly told him Anna must have gone straight to work. Maybe a phone had died. He sounded unbothered, even casual. But then came a chilling moment. On January 4th, Anna's company reported her missing. When police arrived at the house, Brian appeared surprised and strangely calm. He explained that she'd caught a flight, and he hadn't heard from her since. But his story had gaps. He couldn't say which airline she took. He couldn't produce flight details, emails, or calls. He claimed his phone had been off charging during most of that day, and when detectives asked why he hadn't reported his wife missing, he replied, "I thought she was just busy." Police found Anna's car still parked in the driveway. Her luggage was gone, but her passport, work phone, and personal items were all inside the home. Nothing made sense. That same day, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the neighborhood. What they found added another crack in Brian's story. At around 4:30 a.m. on January 1st, the time Brian claimed Anna had already left for the airport, a figure matching his description was seen near the family, this basement door holding what appeared to be a large, heavy bag. In the following days, Brian's movements became even more suspicious. He said he had gone to visit his mother and run errands for the kids, but his timeline didn't match phone data, store receipts, or surveillance footage. On paper, it was a typical missing person case. In reality, something was very wrong. When officers returned to search the home again, they found a faint smell of chemicals. The basement had a fresh coat of paint and a trash bag missing from the bin. There were small reddish-brown stains on the floor. Testing would later confirm it wasn't paint, it was blood. And yet Brian acted like nothing had happened. He smiled for Kim Rose. He told friends, "I'm praying she's okay." He even asked one of Anna, "Is a friend's to keep things quiet until she has found." But deep down, investigators knew this wasn't a disappearance. It was the beginning of something far darker. The perfect family image had cracked wide open. A mother of 3 vanished. A husband under investigation, already known for deceit, and a home hiding secrets that no one was supposed to find. As detectives dug deeper into Brian's timeline, they discovered the first of many disturbing details. Digital breadcrumbs that would change everything. By the 5th day of January 2023, the quiet town of Cohasset had turned into the center of a media storm. Search teams combed through frozen woods. Helicopters circled overhead, and volunteers lined the streets holding missing person flyers with Anna Walshe's smiling face. Her friends refused to believe she'd simply vanished. They described her as disciplined, punctual, responsible. The kind of woman who never missed a call, never skipped a flight. Something was wrong. Inside the Walshe home, detectives found Brian's calmness almost unnerving. He offered coffee, cracked small jokes, even smiled for photographs. But his story kept changing. One moment he said Anna left around 4 a.m. Another, that it might have been closer to 6. He couldn't remember which airline she used. He lost the note she supposedly left. When asked what he did the following day, his timeline made even less sense. He said he'd gone out to buy ice cream with his son in the middle of a winter storm, then stopped at Home Depot to get a few cleaning supplies. Detectives checked surveillance footage. What they saw sent chills down their spines. Brian Walshe, dressed in jeans, gloves, and a mask, casually pushing a shopping cart through the aisles of Home Depot. Inside, mops, buckets, drop cloths, tarps, bleach, and tape. Nearly $450 worth of cleaning gear. Paid in cash. When questioned, he claimed it was for painting the kids' playroom. But investigators had already seen that fresh paint in the basement, covering what looked like small reddish stains. As police began digging deeper, they uncovered more contradictions. Brian told them he'd been at his mother's house for most of January 1st, helping her with chores. But her neighborhood's security cameras showed him driving in and out repeatedly, carrying large, heavy bags to various dumpsters around town. Those dumpsters became critical evidence. Detectives raced to retrieve them before they were collected. One had already been emptied and transported to a waste transfer facility hours away. That single delay would soon lead to one of the most haunting discoveries of the case. Back at home, forensic teams worked through every inch of the Walshe property. They sprayed luminol, a chemical that glows blue in the presence of blood. And the basement lit up. Small splatters dotted the floor, the walls, even the edge of a doorway. Hidden beneath the newly painted surface was a bloodstain large enough to suggest violence, not accident. Police also found a knife with traces of blood, a broken hacksaw, and several trash bags missing from the household supply. Every new detail deepened the suspicion that Anna hadn't left for Washington, D.C. at all. She never made it out of that house. Yet, Brian remained outwardly composed. He texted friends updates about the search, called Ina's co-workers pretending to ask if she'd shown up, and even told police, "I'm just hoping she calls me soon." Behind the scenes, though, investigators began to uncover his digital trail. Subtle hints of what was coming. His phone, supposedly lost, had been active the entire time. It pinged near trash sites, hardware stores, and routes far from his stated path. Every ping was a breadcrumb. Then, on January 8th, police confronted him about his inconsistent statements. Brian doubled down, claiming the timeline confusion was stress. But by then, the evidence was mounting. His purchases, his lies, and the growing physical proof painted a grim picture. This wasn't a misunderstanding. What had started as a missing person case was now turning into a homicide investigation. The public still clung to hope. Maybe Anna had run away. Maybe she'd needed space. But detectives knew better. Didn't he yet have the final piece, the one that would turn suspicion into certainty? And that piece would come not from fingerprints, not from witnesses, but from a screen, a series of Google searches typed in the early morning hours of New Year's Day, each question more disturbing than the last. Every murder investigation has a turning point, a single discovery that changes everything. For Anna Walshe's case, it came from a screen. Detectives had been combing through Brian's phone and computer history, looking for any clue. A message, a call, something that could explain the missing wife who vanished on her way to the airport. What they found instead was something darker, something that made even seasoned investigators go silent. At 4:55 a.m. on January 1st, 2023, just hours after Brian claimed Anela for Washington, a Google search was made from an iPad in their home. It read, "How long before a body starts to smell?" Minutes later, another. "How to dispose of a 115-pound woman's body." Then, "Can you be charged with murder without a body?" Over the next few hours, the searches grew more disturbing. He wanted to know how to clean blood from a wooden floor, how to dismember a human body, how to make a corpse unrecognizable. These weren't random clicks or curiosity. This was a blueprint, a timeline, a man documenting his own crime in real time. Investigators froze as they read through the list. One officer later said it was like watching someone's thoughts unfold right before your eyes. And it didn't stop there. The following day, when Anna's friends were still calling her phone, hoping she'd pick up, New searches appeared. How to stop a body from decomposing. 10 ways to dispose of a body if you really need to. Can you identify a body with broken teeth? Each search was time-stamped, precise, undeniable. Brian had been using his son's iPad, the same device the children used to play games. The contrast was almost unbearable. Detectives now had a digital confession, but they still needed to connect it to physical evidence. They cross-referenced the searches with his movements, matching timestamps to surveillance footage. The result was chillingly consistent. While he was searching how to dispose of a body, security cameras captured him driving to a nearby dumpster. While he was reading about cleaning blood, he was seen buying mops and tarps at Home Depot. Every action aligned perfectly with the words he typed. It wasn't panic. It wasn't impulse. It was methodical. The digital trail revealed the mindset of a man who thought he could erase the truth. One search, one cleanup, one lie at a time. But technology doesn't forget. Every deleted tab, every cached result, every Wi-Fi ping painted a clearer picture. Investigators confronted Brian with the evidence. He stared blankly, denied everything, and claimed someone else might have used the device. But the timestamps and geolocation data placed him right there at home, awake and searching. To the outside world, he was a husband, desperate for answers. Behind closed doors, he was a man researching how to disappear his wife. The discovery of those searches broke the case wide open. Prosecutors would later describe them as a roadmap to murder. Reporters called them the most damning digital evidence in modern true crime, Batavinasti. Investigation deepened. One question lingered. Where was Anna Walshe? If Brian had gone to such extremes to hide his crime, then somewhere out there, the answer, and Anna's final resting place, still existed. As police followed his trail of dumpsters and discarded bags, they began to piece together what he might have done in the hours after she vanished. And what they found would confirm every nightmare theory the investigators feared. The digital trail was damning, but it was what police found next that turned the case into a horror story. After reviewing Brian's suspicious trips and dumpster stops, investigators launched a massive search effort stretching across Massachusetts. They retraced his movements, minute by minute, from his mother's neighborhood to nearby towns, following security cameras, GPS data, and trash collection routes. Brian had claimed he went out to run errands, but footage told a different story. Between January 1st and 3rd, he was seen driving to multiple dumpsters in apartment complexes, industrial parks, even at a local transfer station. He made several trips, often late at night, carrying large black trash bags and tossing them in before driving off. Detectives knew they had to move fast. Many of those dumpsters had already been emptied and transported to regional waste facilities. Teams were sent to sort through tons of garbage by hand, sifting through debris, rotten food, and frozen waste, searching for anything that could connect back to Anna. Then a breakthrough. In a transfer station north of Boston, crime scene technicians found a bundle of heavy trash bags with items that made their stomachs turn. Inside, a bloody rug, a pair of boots, towels, and a purse. All later identified as belonging to Anna Walshe. Alongside them were a hacksaw blade, cleaning rags and fragments of cloth stained with human blood. DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The blood matched Anna's. The items told their own silent story. A desperate, chaotic cleanup. The rug appeared to have been cut, as if something had been wrapped inside. The towels were soaked through, the patterns of smearing, suggesting someone had tried wiping down a large surface. It was a gruesome puzzle, one that fit perfectly with Brian's Google searches and his Home Depot purchases. Investigators found even more disturbing details in the discarded evidence. Inside one of the bags was a Tyvek suit, the kind used for painting or hazardous cleanup. Another contained a pair of gloves, inside out, coated with traces of blood and bleach. These weren't the mistakes of panic. They were the missteps of someone who believed they could clean their way out of a crime. At the same time, analysts reviewed Brian's phone location data. Every ping lined up with key areas where evidence was later recovered. He wasn't just near those dumpsters. He spent several minutes at each one, lingering long enough to unload something heavy. Police also discovered a chilling purchase history from the days following Anna's disappearance. More cleaning products, multiple rolls of tape, and even a new rug, identical to the one found covered in blood. It was as if he was replacing the scene piece by piece. When investigators confronted Brian again, he showed no visible emotion. No panic, no breakdown. He simply said, "You have no proof she's dead." But in the eyes of the law, he was running out of places to hide. The evidence told a consistent, devastating story. A woman disappears on New Year's Day. Her husband buys cleaning supplies and tarps. His searches detail how to dispose of a body. Her blood and belongings are found in trash. He dumped himself. 2 detectives. There was no doubt Anna Walshe had been murdered. But without a body, the case remained technically incomplete. Every new piece of evidence was a glimpse into what may have happened, but never the whole picture. Still, prosecutors believed they had enough to act. They called the findings a mountain of evidence that spoke for itself. And on January 8th, the same day, police confronted him with the physical proof. Brian Walsh's carefully constructed lies finally began to collapse. He was arrested, not yet for murder, but for misleading investigators. Within days, that charge would escalate into something far more serious. On January 8th, 2023, after a week of lies, contradictions, and mounting evidence, police knocked on Brian Walsh's door for the last time. This time, not with questions, but with handcuffs. He greeted them calmly, as if expecting it. There was no scene, no protest. He simply sighed. "Let me grab my jacket." Then he was led outside, hands cuffed, head down, while his 3 small children watched from a window upstairs. At first, the charge wasn't murder. It was misleading investigators. But detectives knew what was coming. They had his search history, his purchases, his movements, his lies, and Anna's DNA found in the trash. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide. In the small Massachusetts courtroom, Brian appeared detached, polite, emotionless, wearing a gray sweater and jeans. As prosecutors began to speak, the silence in the room grew heavier by the second. They laid out the timeline with precision. Brian's early morning internet searches, his Home Depot cleaning spree. The blood found in the basement, the items recovered from dumpsters. Each detail landed like a hammer. Prosecutors described it as a mountain of evidence built on deception. They told the court how Brian's actions were deliberate, calculated, and driven by desperation. They explained that Anna's body had not yet been found, but the sheer volume of forensic proof, they said, left no room for doubt. When Anna's friends and co-workers heard those words, many broke down in tears. Some had clung to hope that she was alive, that maybe she had run away or gone into hiding, but hearing her blood was found on their basement floor, that hope shattered instantly. Meanwhile, Brian sat expressionless, occasionally glancing at the judge, never at the gallery. Not once did he ask about Anna. Not once did he show grief. His defense attorney argued that the case was circumstantial, that without a body, prosecutors couldn't truly prove a murderer had occurred, but everyone in that courtroom could feel the weight of the evidence. Outside the courthouse, reporters flooded the steps. Cameras flashed. Headlines spun: "Husband arrested in wife is disappear." Brian Walshe charged in connection to missing mother. Digital footprints tell a story of murder. As the story spread nationwide, the public turned its attention to the most haunting question. Where is Anna Walshe? While Brian sat in jail, detectives continued searching landfills, waterways, and wooded areas, any place his phone had pinged during those crucial hours. They brought in cadaver dogs, drones, even excavation teams. But still, no body. Prosecutors pressed forward, confident that the digital and physical evidence painted the full picture. They described Brian's behavior as that of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone, who believed he could plan, execute, and erase a crime without consequence. One investigator later said, he underestimated 2 things: forensic science and time. Lies fade, but data doesn't. By the time Brian's murder charge was formally filed, the world already saw him as guilty. The story had all the hallmarks of a modern tragedy. A loving mother gone, 3 children orphaned, and a husband standing at the center of a web of lies. As the prosecution built their case, one image stayed with everyone. The Walshe home, once spotless and bright, now sealed with police tape. Inside, toys still lay scattered across the living room floor. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, lights still glowing. The house looked like it was waiting for someone who would never return. And somewhere, hidden beneath all the evidence and headlines, one truth became impossible to ignore. Anna Walshe hadn't just vanished. She had been erased piece by piece by the man who claimed to love her. What makes the disappearance of Anna Walshe so haunting is that there is still no body. No remains, no final proof of death. Just fragments, data, stains, searches, and silence. And yet, every fragment tells a story. In most murder cases, the body speaks for itself. The wounds, the cause of death, the timeline. But here, prosecutors had to build their entire case on absence. The absence of Anna. The absence of logic in Brian's explanations. The absence of any trace of her life continuing after that New Year's morning. Still, absence can scream louder than evidence. Aina's phone stopped pinging just after 3 a.m. Her credit cards were never used again. Her suitcase, passport, and belongings untouched. And her husband, the man who claimed she left for the airport, never called police to report her missing. Not once. It was Aina's co-workers who raised the alarm, not Brian. By the time detectives pieced together his story, it had collapsed under its own weight. The trips to dumpsters, the bloody rug, the searches about dismembering and disposing of a body, and yet, no Anna. For prosecutors, this was one of the hardest kinds of cases. A nobody homicide. Rare, but not impossible. They pointed to dozens of similar convictions. Cases where the digital trail, and circumstantial clues painted the truth so vividly that a jury didn't need to see the body to understand what happened. But the defense leaned hard on that missing piece. Without a body, they argued, there was no proof of death. Maybe Aina had fled. Maybe she'd started over. Maybe she was alive, somewhere, hiding from a troubled marriage. It was a theory that sounded desperate, but it was enough to keep doubt alive in the public's mind. Meanwhile, the search continued. Landfills were combed through, one truckload at a time. Divers scoured rivers and marshes. Detectives traced every GPS ping from Brian's phone, hoping for one breakthrough, one small clue. But time was slipping away. Evidence decayed. Garbage piles were replaced. And in that chaos, whatever remained of Anna seemed to vanish with it. The case drew national attention. True crime forums exploded with theories. Some speculated that Brian had burned the body. Others believed he had buried it deep in the forest behind his mother's property. There were even claims that he had staged the whole thing, a digital illusion of guilt created by coincidence. But one fact stood out. Every piece of verifiable data pointed in one direction, toward Brian. Prosecutors built their narrative carefully, layer by layer. They described a man whose world was closing in, facing federal fraud charges, financial ruin, and a crumbling marriage. A man who believed that the only way out was to eliminate the problem standing in front of him. And when you looked at the evidence together, the timing, the lies, the searches, it was impossible not to see the pattern. The Google history alone read like a digital confession. How to dispose of a body. How long before DNA is untraceable. How to clean blood from wood. Even without a body, those words painted a chilling picture. The prosecution argued that Aina's disappearance wasn't random, impulsive, or mysterious. It was planned. Every search, every purchase, every lie had purpose. It was a crime designed to leave no trace. But even the smartest killers forget one thing. The internet never forgets. Inside the courtroom, every mention of Aina's name brought visible emotion from the gallery. Friends, co-workers, even strangers, they all came to hear how technology was telling the story her body couldn't tell. One investigator later said, "It's like she was still speaking through the evidence. And that's what makes this case unforgettable. It's not just about a missing person. It's about how digital fingerprints replaced the human ones. How every keystroke, every lie, and every deleted file slowly unraveled the truth." Brian Walshe may have thought that without a body, he was safe. But in reality, the lack of a body only made the story darker. A ghost case, where the victim's absence became her voice. As the trial approached, the world watched closely. asking the same haunting question. How do you prove murder? When the body is gone, Anna Walshe's disappearance is more than a crime story. It is a tragedy of love, deceit, and silence. It began with a marriage that looked picture-perfect and ended with a mystery that may never be fully solved. In the months after her disappearance, the once idyllic Walshe home became a ghost house. The toys, the photos, the memories, all frozen in time. Their 3 young sons were placed in state custody, too young to understand why Mamo sent they coming home, or why Dad was suddenly behind bars. To the outside world, Brian Walshe was the villain in a story that wrote itself. A husband accused of murdering his wife, disposing of her body, and lying to everyone, even as the cameras rolled outside his door. But those who knew him described something more complex. A man who was charming, intelligent, and capable of convincing anyone, even himself, that he was innocent. In court, Brian stood motionless as prosecutors described the evidence. The blood in the basement, the rug in the dumpster, the Google searches that sounded like a confession. He said nothing. No tears, no visible emotion, just the same blank stare, as if waiting for someone else to explain it all away. But this isn't just his story. It's Anna's story, and she deserves to be remembered for who she was, not for how she vanished. Friends described her as driven, magnetic, full of light, a woman who balanced motherhood and ambition, who was building a new life in Washington, D.C., and who never stopped believing in the future, even when the people closest to her began to fail her. Her final known act, according to messages she sent to friends, was one of optimism. She wrote about plans for the new year, about change, about possibility. No one knew those words would become her last, and yet, even in her absence, Anna continues to speak. Every headline, every courtroom update, every conversation about her case is a reminder that her story still matters, that behind every true crime case is a human being. Someone who laughed, worked, dreamed, and loved. The question that haunts this case isn't just what happened, it's why. Why does a man destroy the very thing he once promised to protect? Why does love turn to control, and control to violence? And how many red flags do we ignore before tragedy strikes? In the quiet moments of this story, when the evidence is laid out and the noise fades away, one truth remains. Anna Walshe deserved better. Her children deserved better. And the world will keep asking, will justice ever be enough without answers? As the trial approaches, the stakes couldn't be higher. If convicted, Brian Walshe could spend the rest of his life behind bars. But if the defense can plant just enough doubt, if the absence of a body becomes a weapon, he could walk free. That's the cruel twist of Nobody Murders. Sometimes, the truth dies with the victim. But one thing is certain, Anna's disappearance will never be forgotten. Her story has become a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human nature. Pride, fear, and the illusion of control. Because sometimes, monsters don't hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they sit across the dinner table, smiling. She was light in everyone's life. In memory of Anna Walshe, 1983-2023. Justice begins with remembering the ones we've lost. Subscribe to keep their stories alive.